Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Fahim Niaz. I'm the product manager for Anime Studio. Today's webinar is about Anime Studio Pro 9.5, which was just recently released. We have some awesome new features to share with you, and it will be presented by the Anime Studio team. We have every member available to ask or to answer questions and to also provide some feedback with regards to the webinar. As well, before we begin the webinar, I wanted to let everyone know that you are all muted. As well, if you have any questions, please make sure to ask your questions in the Q&A area, and you will be able to answer those questions at the very end. So please begin asking questions right away, and we'll be able to get to you as soon as we can. With that, I'm going to pass the mic over to Mike Clifton, and he will begin his presentation.
Hi, I'm Mike Clifton, the lead developer of Anime Studio. I'm going to show you some of the new features that we've got coming in Anime Studio Pro 9.5. Some of these apply to debut as well, but we're mostly talking about Pro features here today. First off are some improvements to SmartBones. So one of the big features in Anime Studio 9 was SmartBones. And as they were originally conceived, SmartBones were a way to improve the bending of characters' limbs. So sometimes when a limb would bend, the parts would sort of distort around joints, and SmartBones were a way to correct that. But as people started playing with SmartBones, they realized that they could be used for all kinds of crazy things, and people were setting up rigs and doing unique things where the SmartBones were no longer really bones, they were more like little control handles for animating different properties. So in 9.5 we've added a lot more things that SmartBones can control, things that users have been asking for, and things that will allow you to just animate all kinds of crazy stuff. So I'm going to show you some examples here. In 9.5, SmartBones have the ability to control switch layers. So here I have a SmartBone, and underneath it a switch layer with several objects set up so that when I move this bone, the switch layer just flips through the different shapes. You could imagine maybe using a SmartBone to switch different hand shapes or eye blinks, mouth shapes this way. Here's another one, layer order. So if you set up a SmartBone and a group of layers, you can arrange what order they're in. So the brown bars moving in front of the different green bars as I move the SmartBone around. Next up is visibility. So here I have an object that becomes visible as the SmartBone bends. So a little light turns on. And here I have a path, an object following a path, and the SmartBone is controlling the distance along that path. And finally, a stroke. So this is just a spiral shape with a stroke applied, and the SmartBone is controlling how much of the stroke is exposed. I should have set up keyframes, but let's go ahead and do that now. Create a little animation. So now I'm going to go back and play this back. And as the SmartBones bend, you can see that the properties that they control change over time as well. So this is just going to add a lot of flexibility for rigs that you can set up. I have a couple more to show that didn't fit on that screen, so let's see. SmartBones can also control the position of fill effects. So here we have a shape with a gradient, and as I go through the timeline and the SmartBone bends here, it's changing the position and rotation of that gradient. And now the next SmartBone is going to move, and it's controlling the colors of the gradient. Finally, I have one more over here. This is a vector layer, a 2D vector layer that's been converted to 3D, and the SmartBone can control the thickness of that 3D shape. And actually, if I bend it far enough, the SmartBone is controlling the horizontal flip as well. So where we're at with SmartBones in 9.5 is that SmartBones can control almost any animatable property. There are a couple that are left out, like layer shadow, but pretty much anything you can animate, you can now control with smart bones. So let me see. The next thing I'm going to show is some updates to bone rigging. So you may have noticed that in the previous example, there were some labels on some of the bones. This is something that's new in 9.5. Here's a character where the bones have names. Bones have always been able to be named, but now you can show what those names are. So in the Select Bone tool, we have a Show Label checkbox. So for example, if you have a bone here that controls the turning of a character, back out a little bit so we can see this guy turn. You can simply select the bone and say Show Label. So previously, if we had all the labels turned off, you could have all these smart bones, and unless you were the one that created the rig, it might be hard to know what the different bones do. Now it's easy, just turn on labels, and you can see what your controls are going to do. We also have bone colors in here. You can see that we have orange, purple, green. There's 6 different colors you can choose. The bone colors are purely for your organizational purposes. So you can color bones, you can color leg bones in one way, arms in another way, maybe left and right side of the body, whatever feels useful to you. Smart bones, maybe make them all purple. And what that does is visually on the canvas you can see some bones stand out, and that can help organize things. And then down in the timeline, the keyframes for these colored bones show up as different colors in the timeline. So the turn bone here that's purple, I can see that it has keyframes at these points, and it just separates it from being lumped in together with all the other bones. So that's colored bones. I'd like to thank one of our users. He created this art, Victor Parodies. He's a great animator and has really got a good handle on all the crazy stuff you can do with smart bones. I'll play this guy back just to show. He has a lot of facial expressions, eye blinks, and things that are all controlled by smart bones. There's another improvement to bone rigging that we've got, and this is, we're calling it nested layer control. So previously, when you set up a bone rig, the bone layer could bend and distort a vector layer that was directly inside the bone layer. So if I move these bones here, you can see that the vector shape is not changing. That's something the way the Anime Studio has always been. If you wanted the vector shape to move, it had to be a child of the bone layer. In Anime Studio 9.5, if you put a vector layer or an image layer inside subgroups with it underneath the bone layer, you still have the option to control that vector layer. And if you double-click the bone layer, go to the Bones tab, you can turn on Allow Nested Layer Control. This option is actually on by default. I turned it off in this file to illustrate what's going on. But if I turn that back on, click OK, now this bone layer can move the vector layer that's 2 levels down. It can reach through these different groups and switch layers to control that. So here I've just set up a very simple example to show what it can do. I've got another file. I'm going to show you why you would want to do that. Here's another character. Thanks again to Victor. This character has a lot of smart bones. He's got a head turn here. And let's look at the ears. The ears, you can see, are swapping. The left ear is in front of the head now, and as he turns his head, it goes to the back, and the right ear comes to the front. This gives it a nice 3D head turn effect. But the ears, if we look in the layers, the arrangement here, here's the bone layer. Inside there's a head, and the ears are down inside the head. So the only way that the bones could control that are with this new feature, the nested layer control, where the bones can reach down through groups and control layers that are further down. There's several reasons you might want to do this. One is simply for organization. You can set up folders within folders, simplify your character if you close up all these folders. So that just, will keep you from having a big mess here in the layers palette. The other reason is masking. So the head has some masking effects going on. If all these, the mouth, eyes, hair, head, ears, had to be direct children of the bone layer, then you couldn't really mask them like this. Or you could if you set up a really complex masking situation, but this isolates the head parts from the arms and legs and body because of the nested layer control. Switch layers as well. So here we have a closed hand. I don't think he has an open-handed version, but the bones could reach down into the switch layer and control both the closed and open hands with this new feature. So that's we may get back to some bone stuff, but those are the main things that the improvements for 9.5 as far as bones go and rigging, allowing you a lot more options for how you arrange your characters, a lot more control over what's going on inside a bone rig. I'm going to move on to some styles now. So this is an example of editing the colors and styles of shapes. Anime Studio has always shown this checkerboard effect for the selected shape. The problem is the checkerboard, it's really hard to see. You can tell that the shape is selected, but it's hard to see what the colors are. So we have two things that improve that. The first is live updates. So as I edit colors, let's say I want to change the stroke color of this shape. When I bring up the color dialog, the checkerboard goes away. This shape is still selected, but the checkerboard is gone so that we can see exactly what it's going to look like. So as I change the color, you see it updated immediately, and you know exactly what that's going to look like. When I click OK, it goes back to the normal checkerboard display. This happens for all kinds of things. If I want to edit a brush on the yellow star here, I can see what different brush spacing will do, different brush styles. And that goes back to the checkerboard. The other option is to skip the checkerboard entirely. So here in the style palette, you have a checker selection option. This is the default. This is the way it's always been. If you turn it off, though, you get a box around the shape instead. So the box is, it's more subtle. It doesn't hit you in the face showing what shape is selected, but it also doesn't interfere as much. So it's it lets you look at your artwork the way it actually looks instead of with the checkerboard highlight. And the selection also goes away as you edit stuff. So let's say we want to edit this gradient color. If I want to add in another color here, all this stuff is getting updated live as I edit the gradient too. So those are some improvements we have to the to editing shape effects and styles. Oh, I did say we were going to go back to bones. There is another big improvement we have. Flexi subsets. So here's a character, an image-based character. The body parts are all images, and it has a skeleton controlling the parts. So one problem that we've had with this kind of setup is we're going to look at the right arm here. As I move these bones, notice how the arm is stretching. And if I move the leg, for example, the leg is stretching the arm. The torso is connected as well, so it's all kind of rubbery and connected. The solution to this thing used to be you would separate the body parts. So you'd say you'd place the arm way far away from the body, set up the bones over here, and then put it back together. That was sort of cumbersome, and it didn't always work so well. but it could sort of get around this problem of bones that were close by interfering with each other. In 9.5, we have a much better solution to this, and we're calling it selective flexibinding. It works on image layers. It also works on vector layers. And the way it works is, if I take this arm, the other body parts are already set up, but this arm is the one that's still having the problem. If I select the arm layer, then I go in and I select just the bones that I want to have influence over that arm. So I select, I missed one, click that one too. So there's a set of 4 bones running down the arm. And then I go to the bone menu and say, use selected bones for flexibinding. And what that's telling Anime Studio is only this set of bones should have influence over the arm layer. Turn the arm on and off a couple times so we see. Now once I've chosen that menu command, I can go back and test the bones again. And now you can see that the arm is only moving with those bones. It's not connected. The leg has no influence. The torso is not messing with the arm. So we've isolated the arm from the rest of the skeleton. And that's allows you to create characters that are more with less work, without having to separate the body parts, but still have control over the skeleton inside them. Okay, we're going to move on to depth shifting. Okay, here I have an arrangement of image layers, and I'm going to rotate the scene, look at them from the side. You can see if I look from outside, the images are all flat. They're stacked together. This little shape here, if you haven't looked at the outside view, this represents the camera, and the arrow is the direction the camera is looking. It's looking at this scene that's a flat stack of images. So I'm going to go back to the camera view. If you wanted to create a better sense of depth in a scene like this, what you can do is you can use the transform layer tool, and you can select objects. Let's say this background layer. We've always been able to move things side to side and up and down, and we've always been able to move them forward and back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down the Alt key and click and drag upwards to push this shape backwards. So it went backwards. I'm going to look from the outside again. You can see now that it's further from the camera. The problem is it looks smaller as well, and that's perfectly natural because when something gets further away, it gets smaller. But I'm going to undo that. What if we like this arrangement and we just want things to be spaced further back? We don't want them to look smaller. Well, now we have an option. It's shown up here in the hints. So for transform layer, if you hold down Shift and Alt, you can move an object in Z, move it in depth, but maintain its visual size. So let's see what happens when we do that. I hold down Alt and Shift, and now I click and drag. The object is still getting smaller, but watch what happens when I let go of the mouse. It jumps back and it looks the same. But if we turn to the outside view again, you can see it's gotten much, much bigger. It's very far away from the camera, but it's compensated for that by making itself a lot bigger. You noticed as I moved it, I'm going to move a couple more objects. So let's move the moon backwards, Alt and Shift, and click. As I drag, the object does appear smaller, and this is sort of a hint to you, or to indicate that it is going further away. It's just when you let go of the mouse is when it pops back to its original size. If it maintained that size the whole time, it would sort of feel like you weren't moving anything at all. So while you drag, things really do appear to get smaller. What I'm doing here to switch quickly is I hold down Alt and I right-click on an object to select it, and then I hold down Alt-Shift and left-click to move it backwards. So as I move these things, now we're going to look from the outside again. And you can see that things are sort of spaced out now. There's more depth to the scene. I think maybe the mountains need to go further back. Now what do I get with this depth? Well, from the camera view, everything looks the same. But if I move the camera side to side, you can see that we have a parallax effect now, up and down, side to side. This is sort of what you would see as you drive along in a car. As you're driving, the moon seems to follow you. Things that are further away seem to move slower, and that's just a standard sort of optical illusion of things that are far away versus close by. So it used to be a lot harder. You'd have to move an object in Z and then resize it and reposition it. But what this does, holding down Shift and Alt, maintains the apparent position of an object, just shifts it further away. Okay, we have some updates to the Eyedropper tool. So here I have some vector shapes. Let's say I select one, and I'm going to use the Eyedropper tool. The Eyedropper tool, the way it has worked up until now is if I click on another shape, it will select all the properties of that shape and copy them to the selected shape. So if I want this one to look exactly like this, it copies its fill, its effects, its line, everything. And that's useful, but maybe you don't want to copy everything. So let's say I just want the fill color of this, but I don't want the purple outline. So I can hold down Command and click this to select the fill color. And notice now we have a circle around where I'm clicking, where I'm selecting. I'm still holding the mouse button down. Whatever I mouse over, that's the fill color that I'm choosing. So I could choose from gradients, I could choose from image layers, I could choose from anything that's in the project window. So let's choose one of these, the red up in here, the orangish red. And say I want the stroke from this shape. So I picked a fill color from here, I want a stroke color from here. For stroke color, you hold down Command and Alt, and you click, and I'm getting the stroke color from there. Not the stroke width, I'm just picking stroke color right now. Or I can pick again from the image. Let's go with that purple. Good. There's one more way I can select things, and that's to just copy a color to the clipboard. So now I'm not going to modify this shape. I'm just going to copy something to the clipboard. To do that, I hold down Shift, and again I click, and I can see the color selection that I'm picking right now. And let's go the red in the lips here. So this color, nothing has changed, but I've copied that color to the clipboard. Why would I want to do that? Well, maybe I want to use the color somewhere besides a shape. So let's say the project background color. I've now copied that color to the clipboard. I can just paste it into any color picker. So I'm doing Command V to paste. Pasted that red color I just picked. And let's say this gradient here. Maybe I don't want that green. Maybe I want, let's select the eyedropper again. Maybe I want this green over here. So I Shift click to pick a color. Then I can go into the gradient, paste it in there, say OK. And there we go. So that's changes to the eyedropper. Those features are also available with the Select Shape tool. So if I have this selected, I don't have to switch to the eyedropper. I can just pick a fill color. I can pick a line stroke color. And the eyedropper tool is available regardless of the type of layer you have. So if I have an image layer, I can still use the eyedropper tool. I'm just now only picking to the clipboard. So hopefully that'll improve the way people work with colors, picking colors, using samples from images. Switch layers. Let's move to switch layers. So a switch layer, I'm just going to talk about switch layers for a second. They're a type of group, and the shapes within a switch layer are set up so that only one is supposed to be visible at a time. They're useful a lot for mouth shapes, eye blinks, anything that you want to sort of change suddenly from one shape to another, or that would be difficult to smoothly change from one to another. So one thing that's new is if you have a switch layer and you want to change what is visible, you don't have to go to the layers palette anymore. You can hold down Alt, Command, and right-click on the switch layer in the canvas to see a list of the possible choices, and you can just directly change what you want to be shown at any point in time. So in this case, we have a simple project with just a switch layer in it. But if this mouth were in the middle of a complex character with folders and subfolders and groups, it'd be easy to just Alt-Command click on the canvas and change what was visible in the switch layer. We also have layer colors were something new in Anime Studio 9. A switch layer now reflects the layer colors in the keyframes. So if I scrub through the timeline, you can see that we're changing to different mouth shapes. And the keyframes that indicate when the switch layer switches, the colors correspond to the layer colors here. So we're now between purple and yellow. So purple is the active keyframe. And if we look here, it matches. The purple is the AI mouth shape. So it sort of just gives you an indication in the timeline about the changes going on in the switch layer. Just to clarify something I said about holding down Alt and Command. Alt and Command or Control. So on Windows it would be Alt Control. On Mac it would be Alt Command to change the mouth shapes or any switch layer shape. We also have a couple changes to switch layers for frame-by-frame animation. So this is something that's not Anime Studio is set up so you don't have to do frame-by-frame animation, but there are some times when maybe you need to, that some kind of effect you're going for really calls for frame-by-frame drawing. So I'm going to do a quick little example here. So let's say to do frame-by-frame animation, you create a switch layer, and then you're going to put vector layers inside it. So the first change is if you add a vector layer to a switch layer that has no layers in it yet, that layer becomes the active layer. These are sort of common sense improvements that we've made to switch layers to just sort of speed up the workflow a little bit. So now I can go ahead and draw something in this vector layer. And I'm going to add a few more. So let's go ahead a few frames. Turn on some onion skins. And I'm going to create another vector layer. This new vector layer, because I've added it in the middle here, it becomes the active layer inside the switch group. And I can draw another shape. I can go ahead a few frames, add another vector layer, draw another shape. Now what's happening here, this is something you could do before in Anime Studio. The improvement that we've made here is that as I add these vector layers, traditionally when you added a new vector layer to a switch group, that layer would be invisible up until that time. The problem is if you're doing a frame-by-frame thing, if you want to change the timing a little bit, having a layer be invisible was kind of a mess because it made it difficult to, I think I just messed up the timing there, which is a good example because the visibility would have been a problem right now. I only wanted it to change to layer 7 here. And so now I can just draw one last one. So now since the layer visibility is not being changed at all as I add these vector layers, I'm free to change the timing. So I can look at the little thing I created here. Let's turn off the onion skins. So a little blob dropping down to the ground. But if I want to change the timing, I can select these switch layers. I hold down Alt and drag the keyframes to change the timing. I don't have to care now that these layers have visibility turned on or off because they don't. So I can change the timing of that and simply have the thing go slower, play back slower, or I can drag it back to the left and have the whole thing play back faster. And visibility is just not a factor here at all. I can also rename a layer. So let's space this out a little bit more. If I change layer 5, I want to call it halfway. It's halfway fallen to the ground. I click OK. That used to change the switch animation, but it doesn't anymore. Now, as you rename a layer inside a switch group, it updates the keyframes of the switch group so that they still reference the halfway layer at that time. Also, if you add a new layer, so let's say layer 5, so it ensures that new layers have unique names. So layer 5 used to be this one. I renamed it so the name layer 5 is available again. It makes sure that the names don't conflict, which is a problem with switch layers. The layers have to have unique names in order for the switch layer to work. And now the switch layer makes sure that they have unique names. So let's move on to grain inactive layers. So this is a little workflow thing. So here we have a complex scene with a lot of layers, a lot of different animated parts. This is a simple option we've added that it's in the View menu called Fade Unselected Layers. It's also available down here in Display Quality, Fade Unselected Layers. If I turn that option on, only the layer that I have selected in the Layers palette is fully colored. So if I choose the child here, she's colored and the rest is sort of faded out. And the reason for that is in a complex scene like this, sometimes you may want to isolate the object you're working with. So now I can see right away that she's the focus of my animation attention right now, and everything else is, I want to see it to see that they're interacting properly, but I don't want to concentrate on it too much. I can select the mother, and now she's the focus of attention. So this is purely for your workflow to organize sort of your visual workspace and clean things up a little bit. It doesn't affect rendering or animation in any way. It's just a visual thing. If I turn it back off again, then everything comes back to full color. We're going to move on to masking. There have been some improvements in masking quality in 9.5, but another big improvement is in how you visualize a masking setup. So previously, I'm going to turn off masking for this group. Previously, when you had masking set up, you had no way of knowing it other than you were the one who set it up and hopefully you would remember. But if you look at a group and the layers in it, there was no indication that masking was going on here. Usually you would see something going on the canvas, but if you had a very complex scene, it could be hard to tell. So now when we turn on masking, I'll turn it back on here, we see little indicators. So these are a little small. Hopefully you can see them on the webinar. But on the group, we have a little icon on top of the folder that tells us masking is turned on for this group. And then in the sublayers of that group, we have little icons that tell us what contribution each layer is making to the mask. So this bottom layer here has a little plus icon, and it's telling us that this layer is adding to the mask. The next layer up has an icon that tells us this layer is masked. When I turn them on and off, or turn them on as we talk about them. So this one's adding to the mask. The next layer up is being masked. So you can see it's a circle, but it only shows where the other layer is. Another layer is being masked. The next layer up is adding to the mask. So it shows everywhere, and it adds to the mask for this final layer that is showing through the black one and the orange one. And I can go in and I can change these. So this layer, I can right-click. This is something that's also new. It's a 9.5, and I can subtract from the mask. So I'm cutting out a hole, so the yellow shape is cut away here from the mask. So masking can still get complicated if you add and subtract, and you can do all kinds of crazy stuff. Here I'll add it but keep it invisible. So now you don't see it, but the yellow shape can show through it. So you can set up some pretty complex masking setups, but at least now you can see at a glance, oh, there's masking happening here in this group, and I can get an idea of what the contribution is of each child of that group. I thought about something here as I was clicking on these layers that I didn't talk about, but layer colors. So before we could set a layer color, we could set it to purple, and that layer is now highlighted just for your own organizational purposes. But you can also now do it a little quicker. There's a little area here to the left of the eyeball. If you click in that, you can set the color of different layers. So just a quicker access to that layer coloring feature. So these icons are helpful for masks. We have another icon that sort of does a similar thing for path following. So here we have an arrow, and it's going to follow this path. A pretty simple setup. But before, you would just sort of have to remember that you set up that arrow and it was supposed to follow the path. Now if you look in the layers palette, this is the arrow layer, and this is the path layer. And the arrow layer has a little squiggle, a little curved line on it indicating a path. And that just tells us that this layer is following a path. And this is useful because if I look at this example, it's simple. I can see, oh yeah, that arrow is following the path. But sometimes people set up a situation where maybe you don't want a visible path. So let's get rid of the stroke on that. And now you hit play, and you see the arrow moving in a crazy path. But you may not remember why it's following that path. And you look at the group, and you don't see any keyframes. Oh, okay, so here we see a path following keyframe, which does help. But we've had situations in the past where users have set up complex animations and were a little mystified about why an object is following some complex range of motion. Now you can just, at a glance, you would know that there's a path following going on. All right. I hope I'm not jumping topics too fast for everybody, but now we're moving to brush spacing. This is I can't show you the bad way it used to be because I'm running 9.5, but this is an improvement to brush spacing. Here I have a screenshot. This is rendered out from Anime Studio 9.2, and it shows a path with a brush stroke applied to it. And we had situations where brush strokes didn't necessarily work very well. So this shows when you have a path where things get very curvy, brushes would be spaced out further, and where things get pointy, the brush would get clumped up together. Also at the ends of the path, the brush tended to get clumped up. So now I'm going to hide that screenshot, and we're going to look at the same curve in 9.5. So here we see that the same brush, this is the same exact file, is spaced out evenly across the whole curve. And as I change the curvature, the spacing stays even. So this is a big improvement to brushes, especially brushes that, let's select this, say like the star brush here, that's designed to be widely spaced, or this little spirally thing. brushes that are dense like this didn't really have a problem, but brushes that were spaced did, and that's much improved in Anime Studio 9.5. Okay, I've got a few things now I'm going to show just for fun. I have a couple of scripts. So this first one is a Panorama Script. So I'm going to back out here. This is just a simple image. Well, not so simple, but it's just an image layer. But what's special about this image is it's a spherical panorama. So what that means, it wasn't created in Anime Studio. It was created with Panorama stitching software. But it's 360 degrees from the left side to the right side. So it goes all the way around in a full circle, and it goes all the way from bottom to top. It's 180 degrees from straight down to straight up. So the coverage is a full sphere around where I was standing when I took this. What you have now in Anime Studio 9.5 is in the Scripts menu, we have under Image, Spherical Panorama Script. So if I have a spherical panorama image layer and I select this script, what happens is a new 3D layer has been created. And the 3D layer is a sphere, and that image has been applied as a texture map. So I'm going to rotate and look at an outside view here. And now we can see this sphere with the camera in the center and the image wrapped all the way around it. So looking on this outside view is just to illustrate sort of what's going on. Things still look distorted. But back in the camera view, things don't look distorted anymore. And if I start moving the camera around, I can look around this scene. I can look up, all the way up, straight down, side to side. And you have this full range of motion. What you can do with this is you could create backgrounds where the camera can move around and look in different directions. And I've actually created a little animation here. If I turn on some objects I've placed in the scene, I create some camera movement, and I can now play back the animation. So the objects are placed in 3D, and the camera is just moving around looking at the scene. So I know of a couple people that have been experimenting with this Panorama Script so far. It may just be sort of for fun. We'll see if it's useful in Anime Studio animations or other projects that you're working on. There's a similar thing for fisheye pictures. So here's this is a picture that was shot with a full-frame fisheye lens. You can see that the edges are distorted. There's curvature going on here. This kind of fisheye lens spans 180 degrees from one corner to the other. So it's not a full panorama. It's just a single picture, but it's a very, very wide picture. And so here we have just what it looks like out of the camera. If I go to the Scripts menu again, Image, Fisheye, this time it creates a 3D layer again, and it texture maps the image onto it. But this time it's not a full sphere, it's sort of a curved dome in front of the camera. And that curved dome removes the distortion so that when I go back into the camera view, I can look around again in multiple directions as if I were looking around sort of a 3D space, turning the camera around. And I think I have some animation on that one. So I don't know, fisheye lenses are not super common. If anybody's interested, on the forums I can recommend a good cheap one. But that's just sort of, photography is sort of a hobby, and I thought we could have some cool photography-related scripts in there.
Hi, everyone. We're nearing the end of the webinar, so if you have any questions, please make sure to ask your questions right now, and we hope to be able to get to all those questions. Thank you.
I've got a couple more things I'm going to show. Go ahead and ask your questions, and we'll get to them in a little bit. A couple more improvements. The freehand tool. Let's create a new document with sort of a wide brush. And so the freehand tool has had tapering options for a long time, and what that means is when you draw a stroke, it automatically tapers the ends. Let's hide the control points. So the ends get tapered down to nothing, and that looks pretty good, but the ends are very pointy. We wanted to give you a little more control over that. So now in the freehand options, we have a percentage for the tapering. It used to always go down to 0%. Now you can say put 40% for the tapering on the ends. And now when I draw a curve, you can see the ends still taper down, but not to tiny little points. So that just gives you a little more control over the style of the curve. And I've got one more just for fun script to show you before we move on to questions. This has to do with patterns and tiling. So there's actually a pair of scripts under the tiling submenu. To use these, first you choose the Create Tile script. And it gives you a few choices. If you want triangular tiles, half triangles, squares, rectangles. I like the half triangle, so we'll use that one. Actually, I'm going to cancel for a second and choose a different background color or color for the tile. So, create tile. Okay. In the layers palette, you see that it has created a few layers set up in a masking group. So I'm going to make the tile just a little bit bigger. And there's a design layer, a mask layer, which is the triangle, and a design layer. So at this point, it's up to you to draw some kind of design on the design layer. So let's say go with something here. Hold on. I'm going to create just a couple shapes real quick. Okay, and then I'm going to jump ahead several frames, and I'm going to animate this design layer. So I'm just going to type in an angle of 360 degrees. So nothing's going to seem to change, but the object over time has rotated 360 degrees. I can add another design layer if I want, just add another layer in here. And on this one, I'm going to, let's say, just add some freehand shapes. Okay. I'm going to jump ahead and I'm going to animate this layer as well. I'm going to have it go minus 360 degrees. So now it rotates the other direction. So what do we have here? Well, not a lot yet. We have a triangle masked with some random shapes moving around in it. So now we select the tile layer and we go back to the tiling menu and we have the second script called Repeat Tiles. So now we click OK on this one and it's going to repeat that tile over and over again across the workspace. And as I play this, you get a nice kaleidoscope sort of effect. So this is a fun thing to experiment with. There's a couple options for a delay, which can cause the effect to change from the left side of the screen to the right side. But it's just sort of a tiling, repetitive kaleidoscope animated effect, just for fun. Might be able to use it for some neat backgrounds and stuff. And I think that's about all the features I had on my list of things to show. If we have some questions.
Yes, Mike, we do. This is Jason. I'm just going to field some of the questions here. There's a bunch that came in, so hopefully we can get to all of them. One of the first ones was the keyframes. Do they match any of the colors for any of the smartphones or layers or anything like that?
The keyframes for switch layers match the layers. Let me go find the phone colors. For bones, so let's say the purple bone here, the keyframes don't get colored to match the bone, but the channels here are colored. So if you look on the left side, the angle, translation, and scale for purple bones have their own channels, and horizontally along here, the line that follows the channel is color-coded to that bone too. The keyframes themselves are not colored because you can choose your own keyframe coloring. Keyframe coloring came before bone coloring, so you can go in here and you can choose green. So this purple bone has a green keyframe at this time, but the keyframes themselves are not colored except for switch layers. And then as far as other layer types, the way the timeline works is you only see the keyframes for that layer. So when I select the red layer here, it doesn't have any keyframes in it, but okay, how about this one, this blue layer? There's no need to color these blue because all the keyframes that you see here are for this layer.
Okay, thank you. Next, are there any scripting SDK updates for 9.5?
There are quite a few scripting changes. The 9.5 installer comes with the latest scripting interface files. I don't have a list of what those changes are offhand, but there are quite a few changes. You can access things like bone colors and labels, and we've added some things that people have asked for, but I don't have a specific list.
Cool. Let's see. Is there, can you use the toon render on panoramic view, on the panoramic image?
Good question. You can't, oh. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, we'll have to experiment with that. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's some more questions about smartphones. I'm not sure if you maybe want to bring up one of the, oh, it looks like you
No, it doesn't.
No,
It doesn't use the toon render on the final thing. So that's, you'd have to process the image before you convert it into a panorama.
Okay. So there's a few more questions around smartphones. So one of them is, can masks be controlled by smartphones? Masks?
No. Smartphones can control animated properties, and you can't animate a mask. I mean, you can use a smartphone to control the shape of a mask or the position of the mask, but you can't animate over time, like whether a certain layer adds to a mask versus subtracts or something like that. That's not an animatable property. You can control layer visibility and layer order, so you could use that to sort of control masking effects.
That leads to the next question. Can a smartphone control shape stacking order within a single vector layer?
No, it can't. That's another property that's not animatable, so smartphones can't control that.
Okay. Let's see, what else do we have here? Can you, somebody's asking if you can show the layer, how to set the layer color again?
Yeah. So I'll just create a bunch of layers here. So there's multiple ways to do it. One is to the left of the eyeball here, there's a little more space. And if you click on that space, you get a pop-up menu that lets you choose the layer color. So there's two reasons for the space. One is when layers were selected, you couldn't really see the color. But now this little, because of the selection color, this little space still lets you see that this is a green layer when it's selected. So it shows you that it's green and it's an area that you can click to choose the color. You can also, if you double click a layer and get into the layer settings dialog, you have a layer color option here. So I can change it to purple, and now it's purple. And the third way is this is sort of a shortcut to some of the layer settings. And one of those is the layer color here. So I can choose layer color in this pop-up dialog and make it yellow now.
Okay, thanks, Mike. There's a couple more questions coming in regarding binding layers to bones.
Mm-hmm.
I think could you possibly show them which tool you would use, like to bind like maybe bring up the image, the guy that's made out of images, and show them how you would bind a layer to a bone?
Yeah, that was this guy. I'm not sure if this is what they're asking about, but this is not a new thing to 9.5. But let's say instead of bending with these bones, I wanted the layer to move just rigidly with this entire bone. So I could select the right arm, and this is the binding tool, the binding layer tool. So I would use this tool and click the bone that I want to bind to. So now the arm is bound to just this bone here. So when I bend the arm, you see that it doesn't, the bones are bending in this curve, but the arm is just bound to this one bone inside the arm. So sometimes you want to do that for a more cutout effect if you don't want an image to bend and be sort of squishy with bones. You just bind it to a single bone using the bind layer tool here.
Okay, thank you. And so I think in your example you were showing a layer that is a sublayer, correct? The right arm layer there is within a group, subgroup?
This one is not, but it could be.
Okay, they were just wondering if it could be.
Yeah. So you put the right arm in a group, and I don't know if I have. Yeah, nested layer control is turned on. So now this right arm could be set to use selected bones for flexi binding, and then it's still bound to. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
Yeah.
There's one more question coming in. Somebody's wondering what the new timeline option called relative keyframing does.
Oh, okay. So I'll create a little example here. If I move this object, so let's say I want it to, over 3 seconds, I want it to move to the side, and in the middle I want it to move up and down a little bit. Okay, so it bounces up and down. Now suppose I realize, oh, I want that motion, but I want it to be up here. Well, the way it historically has been in Anime Studio, you would need to go and you'd need to move this keyframe, move the object up, go to this keyframe, move the object up. Because see, if I just am at this last keyframe and I move the object up here, it's only moving it at that one time. And I wanted to move the entire curve up there. So the way I can do that is I select all the keyframes that I want to move. I make sure that relative keyframing is on, and then I move the object upwards. And when I let go, it updates all the keyframes that were selected. So now the whole path of motion has moved upwards. This is something that was new to Anime Studio 9, where if you had multiple keys selected, you would move all those keys. So here I'm not just moving this one position. Since I have multiple keys selected, I'm moving all of them. So I've moved the entire path of the object. That was new to Anime Studio 9.0, but it was always on. You didn't have an option to not do that. If you wanted to not do that, you had to make sure that your keyframes were deselected. Relative keyframing gives you the option. If you have it turned off, then even if you have multiple keys selected, if you move an object, they don't all move with it. So this is just, it's a useful feature, but people were sometimes getting confused why multiple keyframes were moving, and it was because they were selected, and this, in effect, this choice was always on for them. So we just made it an option now. If you don't want that behavior, you can turn it off, turn it back on, and it's right here in the timeline because it may be something that we anticipate people turning on and off a lot as they work.
Okay. Rudy asked another question around binding. He was wondering if points can be binded, and yes, they can in vector layers.
Points, yes. Yeah, so flexi binding is sort of the default because it gives you something quick and easy to work with, but if you want to bind an individual point to a specific bone, you can do that. It can take more work to set up a rig that way, but it gives you more control over what's going on.
Okay, so there's a question about the preview window. There were some improvements to the preview window.
So the preview window, when you do Command R or File Preview, you get this window where it renders out what the final result is going to be. There's certain effects, like here we see a shadow that don't show up in the workspace. There's some improvements here, like zooming. We can zoom in and out. It's especially useful if you have a very high resolution project. You can zoom in, look at the details, zoom back out. And here it shows you, this area is not part of the rendered result. The preview window also, you could always have multiple open, but they could sort of get lost if you go back to work. The window's still there. See, it's back behind the main window. But we list them here in the window menu, so I can go back and find renders that I've left open.
Hi everyone, this is Fahim again. Just wanted to let you know that we've reached our 1 hour time allocation, but we're going to go a little bit over, so if you have any more questions, please continue to ask them and we will try to get to as many before we end the webinar.
Mike, one more question here. Could you show us the layer shading update?
Oh yeah, I had that on my list, but I didn't get to it. So I think this is the one we're talking about. Here's another little creature. I thanked Victor before. I've been showing several of his creations. Thanks again, Victor. If I render this, it looks great, but say I want a little shading on it. We've had this option in here forever. If you go to Layer Settings, you can turn on Layer Shading, click OK, and then when you render a result, you get a sort of shaded effect on a character, as if it were lit, and that part sort of curves away from you and is shaded. We have another option, though. This is new to 9.5, inverted shading. So if I turn on inverted shading, and I'm going to change the angle of the shading here. Now when I render, instead of a shaded area on the bottom edge, I get sort of a backlit effect. So it shades everywhere except this edge. So it's just a quick way to get sort of a backlit effect using layer shading.
Okay, Mike, there's one more question here. Does the interpolate function in switch layers work with smartphones?
No, it does not. Yeah, short answer, no, it does not.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. So with the layer depth thing, is that orthographic camera? Somebody's wondering if that's an orthographic camera?
Where I was moving the layers forward and backwards, and no, that's a perspective camera.
And one more question, are there any new surprises with support to Poser 2014?
I don't know if they're surprises. They're good things. I hope that's the kind of surprises we're talking about. Maybe, Jason, you want to fill us in. You've tested that more, but I know there's some cool stuff.
Okay, yeah, definitely. So there's definitely been some interest there, and I think we utilize the Poser SDK, so most of the new features that go into Poser 2014 are supported. One that maybe a fun surprise is the bullet physics and soft body dynamics. So if you create a squishy, bouncy object in 3D in Poser, you can import that scene into Anime Studio and utilize it in your Anime Studio scene. Sorry, I'm just checking back at this question.
I think the physics also work with human figures, right? So if you have, if you animate a character that gets punched in the belly or just sort of jiggles as they walk, that stuff works in Anime Studio as well.
Yes, there's a cartoon character in Anime Studio as well. Yeah, there's a cartoon character in. There's a few cartoon characters that are new to 2014 Composer, and one of them has one of the gentlemen there has a big belly, and so one of the tests I did was have the belly bounce around while he walked, and it works in Anime Studio, jiggles around. So there's a couple more smartphone questions. One is, can a smartphone deform a 3D object?
Yes, bones can deform 3D objects in general. Is my screen still up? Yeah. So this is spur of the moment, quick little thing. But if you have a 3D object and you put it inside a bone group, the bones can deform that object. So there are limitations here because bones are only arranged in 2D. So for example, I can't make the object bend towards me. But because bones in general can warp 3D objects, smart bones can do that too. So if I set up smart bones to control other bones, they could then warp the object as well. We don't have a feature where you can animate individual points of a 3D object. So smart bones can't control that because that just doesn't exist, but they can warp 3D objects. The other way you can create 3D objects is with a regular vector layer. Oops. So if I create some random shape here, this is just a flat vector layer, but I have options inside a vector layer where I can convert it into 3D in a couple different ways. So now the object is a vector layer, and I can still edit the 2D points of a vector layer. So now anything that smart bones can control, so smart bones can control curvature, for example, they could control it on this vector layer, and then the vector layer would get converted into 3D. So you have some limitations here. You can extrude what you can draw in 3D. That could be text or hand-drawn shapes. You can create lathe objects, and all those could then be fully controlled by smart bones. You can create holes in objects. It's actually a pretty cool feature.
Can a smartphone control another bone in a sublayer?
Smart bone control another bone in a sublayer. Yes, I believe it can. I could try and create an example. I don't know. That may be a little too complicated to create on the spur of the moment, but yeah, I believe it is.
Possible, yeah.
I believe it is.
Okay, great. So there was one other question about text, the text layer. I think there was a mention somewhere about the text layer conversion to vectors, and I can answer that quick. You can right-click on a text layer and convert it to vectors. So if you want to then go in and edit those vectors, you can, just like a normal vector object. Oops, I'm sorry. I hope we've got to everybody's questions. I was trying to answer a few while we were going there, and if not, I'm sure Fee might mention this in a second, but the Lost Mogul forums is a great place to go and answer questions. So if we didn't answer your question here today, please pop up there and ask it up there, and hopefully somebody can help you out.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again for joining us today. We want to thank the team as well for giving us a wonderful presentation on the new features of Anime Studio Pro 9.5. Thank you very much, guys. If you guys want more information, definitely what Jason mentioned about the Lost Marble Forum, that would be a great resource for you. As well, please go on our website at anime.smithmicro.com. It's right on your screen right now. And if you want some more information on webinars, please check out the link that's available there as well. We would love for you to like us on our Anime Studio page on Facebook, so please do that as well. And on Twitter, we're available there all the time. As well, if you would like some good deals on Anime Studio, please subscribe to our email list. It is displayed there, the link is. And as well, we have an affiliate program. If you have a website or if you would like to make a little bit of extra money by promoting our products, you're more than welcome to do so. And finally, if you're a student or a teacher, we do have educational pricing. The link on your screen is available to anyone that's a student or a teacher to access and to get special discounts from on Anime Studio and on other products that we offer. And with that, I wanted to thank everybody for joining us today. We really appreciate your time, and I hope you get a chance to play around with Anime Studio Pro 9.5. Thank you.